Okay, and we can get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Pinto here at Phoenixville Public Library, and with me tonight here at the library is our own Walter Hook for his presentation on Pennsylvania's cut glass industry. Glad to have everyone here, and please enjoy the presentation. We welcome now Walter. Take it away.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, everyone, and hello, Joe and George. You know who you are. I expect that you're out there, so thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight's presentation is titled Crystal Gold, Pennsylvania's Cut Glass Industry from the Gilded Age to the Great Depression. The concept of Gilded Age is a term from a lesser-known Mark Twain novel titled The Gilded Age, A Tale of Today. It was published in 1873. And it satirized the golden age after the Civil War. The term was essentially adopted by historians and social scientists in the 1920s. And the designated time frame for the quote unquote Gilded Age was 1877 to 1895. And it was a period of extreme wealth and extreme poverty. The period coincided with the Middle Victorian period in Britain and the Belle Epoque in France. It was followed by the Progressive Era in 1896 through 1916, the beginning of the First World War. The cut glass epoch that we're going to talk about tonight will be the brilliant period. The cut glass epochs, essentially the early period, 1771 to 1830, the middle period up to 1880. However, 1880 is something of a misnomer because it most likely started the brilliant period for the popularity of brilliant cut glass. Started in around 1876 at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, where Christian Dorflinger and others created an interest in rich cut glass. Dorflinger was the premier presenter of cut glass at that point in time, and he walked away with the highest awards in the exposition. The period of brilliant glass declined after 1917 to 1930, hit by the Depression. We'll talk about some of the reasons why there was a decline in the rich cut glass concepts or in the decline in the brilliant period. Glass manufacture. I'll give you an overview of how glass is manufactured. Brilliant period glass contains about 35% lead. And the glass was essentially a mixture of silica, lead, and potash that gave it clarity. If you were looking at any of the glass that was produced as brilliant cut glass during that period, it fluoresces green, yellow-green when examined under long wavelength UV. Another characteristic is if you tap it gently with a pencil on the edge of the glassware, or you click it with your finger, and there should be a clear bell-like sound. If it's a dull thud, it's not true brilliant period glass. So that it's one of the ways of identifying true glass from phony reproductions or even some pressed glass that we'll mention. What is the concept of glass cutting? Why would people cut glass? Well, the purpose of cutting glass and using cut glass items was to enhance otherwise Spartan existences that were in existence at that point in time. The other advantage was that cut glass was expensive. It took maybe 10 hours of work, of man hours, 10 hours of labor to produce one tray or one plate of cut glass. I'll give you some examples of some of the items later in this presentation also. Unfortunately, since we're not live and in person in the library, I couldn't bring any samples of what this cut glass, this heavy cut glass is really like and what it feels like and what it sounds like. But you just have to take my word for it. It's heavy, it rings when you snap it, and it's essentially flawless, perfect glass. Back up a moment. When we were talking about the production of glass, we said that about 35% of the material in the glass itself was lead. There were certain problems resulting from that that weren't particularly known at the point in time when the glass was used. The unfortunate situation is that the lead leaches out of the glass. So if one were to have a decanter that contained rich cut glass, brilliant cut glass, it's crystal cut glass, it would leach out lead into whatever the material, whatever the liquid was that you would have in the decanter, let's say wine, water, lemonade, any type of fruit drinks or anything like that. And it would leach out exponentially, essentially. And it was one of the hazards, and also one of the occupational hazards for the men who would produce the glass itself. Several issues resulted in medical conditions in the glass cutting industry. Silicosis was common because of the inhalation of the powder that was produced as the glass was being cut. That was one of the issues. The other were fire injuries, burn injuries because of heating glass. It has to, that mixture of silica and lead and potash would be heated to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So burns were not uncommon. Later in the process of the production of brilliant cut glass around the 1900s through the 1930s, some of the polishing that was done through the use of acid solutions. And obviously the acid solutions were a hazard to the workmen and just added to the unfortunate situations that they may have encountered health-wise. The fumes, the vapors from the acid were not particularly healthy, and there was no OSHA in effect in that time frame to protect the workers' rights. Now, with the glass cutting, once we'll go through the process of what happens once the glass is melted, and that mixture of the silica, the potash, the lead is heated to 2,500 degrees in a container, let's see, the word escapes me right now, clay pot, simple clay pot. And the glass is called a gather. As the temperature increases, the materials blend. A whitish scum called glass gall is skimmed off the surface of the glass that's in the clay pot. And once that's accomplished, the glass then is allowed to cool somewhat, not to room temperature, obviously, but it's allowed to cool. And once its satisfactory temperature is reached, the glass assumes a thicker, taffy-like appearance and consistency. And a workman called the gatherer takes a gather of this molten glass, and that's called the gather, and puts it and attaches that to the end of a 4-foot-long blowpipe, a hollow metal tube. And the gatherer then gives this to the servitor or directly to the principal glass blower called the gaffer. And the gaffer blows into this gob of molten glass, and it expands into what's called a bell. It becomes a shell, with an opening in the center. The gaffer then spins the blowpipe, and this gradually extends the ball of molten glass, as bell, until it reaches a desired length. If it's too long, it just holds the blowpipe perpendicular to the horizon, and the weight of the glass will then condense and decrease so that it reaches the proper size that the gaffer wants. So that once that's obtained, then other members of the crew, work crew, will either provide other pieces of molten glass to the piece that the gaffer is holding to add a handle, to add legs to the item, or some other trinkets that might be attached to to that piece of glass. The glass is then separated from the blowpipe. In some instances, the glass that's on the blowpipe could be placed in well, it's still on the blowpipe, placed into a metal mold and further shaped. Now, there are different items too. If it's a plate, you obviously don't want something that's going to have a bulbous consistency or bulbous structure. So it has to be a flat structure. So it would be placed into a mold. The mold will then shape it into plate-like fashion or some type of hooded fashion. Now, if you do any research and look at any of the examples of cut glass that may be extant in some of the museums or in some of the reading that you do, you'll see that there were cut glass lampshades, and these are dome shaped, so that there are any number of ways that the molten glass, the soft glass, can still be shaped and worked. And then it's allowed, once it's shaped, it's allowed to cool to room temperature. And this could take several days. If it's cooled too quickly, the glass could crack. If it doesn't, if it's not annealed properly, if it doesn't cool consistently, it will be damaged even once the cutters start to do the glass cutting. So that it's very, very important to have the glass of proper consistency. Now, a couple things too. Once the glass is ready for cutting, it's examined to make sure that it's a suitable piece. Good quality glass won't have bubbles. If there are any bubbles in the glass, then it's just discarded, thrown back into the pot and remelted, and hopefully turns out better the next time. The process of glass cutting consisted of 3 basic steps. One was rough cutting, the next was smoothing, and then the third was polishing. Rough cutting was done usually with a steel wheel, and the steel wheels were in 3 general shapes: convex, flat, or V-shaped. Now, that doesn't mean that there were only 3 wheels. There may have been 60, 70 different types of wheels with the various convex structure, the size of the convex, the size of the depth of the V, the width of the V. And in some cases with mitered cuts, a single wheel may have 2 or 3 V-shaped lines cut into it, so that when the glass item is being cut, the lines will be correctly parallel to each other. You can envision if an item is going to have 3 or 4 parallel lines or nearly parallel lines, if each one had to be individually cut, the likelihood is somewhat low that they would be perfect. So by having a single wheel with 3 or 4 different lines being cut simultaneously allowed for better uniformity. Now, uniformity is something that if you were to buy a single item or any items that were being passed off as brilliant period cut glass, you may want to use a caliper to see, because each item is hand cut. All the work that goes into producing the item is manual labor, and each side, each portion of that piece of glass is cut individually, and it's by a workman cutting by looking through the glass, not looking at the surface as being cut. He's looking at the surface as being cut by looking through the glass, not looking directly at the wheel, touching the glass, because of the fact that the cutting process usually required wet sand, carborundum powder, whatever being dripped onto the wheel, which would obstruct the vision, so that the professional or the truly experienced artisans, when they were cutting, could tell the depth that they were cutting simply by the feel and by looking through the opposite side of the glass onto the area where they're cutting. Once the rough cut is completed, then it's smoothed with a smaller stone, and that smaller stone may add some additional cutting, but not to the extent that the rough cutting perpetrates. And I'll show you some examples of an item that was rough cut but never polished because of a significant defect. Once the item is smooth, with smaller stones and with some extra cutting, as polished with pumice or with a wooden wheel, a cork wheel, or a wheel that is coated with walrus skin. After 1900, though, glass was generally acid polished. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that it was acid polished created a biological hazard for a chemical hazard for the workmen, with the fumes and obviously the spills and the other dangers that resulted from the use of acids. Not all the companies, however, did use acid polishing. DORFLINGER, one of the major and the premier cut glass companies, and one of the most prestigious of all the companies we'll talk about today, did not use acid polishing to the greatest extent. So that once we've gotten the glass cut, it's ready to be delivered. Now, this is a photograph that was provided to me by childhood friend and former neighbor, Peter BECKER, who's the managing editor of the Tri-County Independent in northeastern Pennsylvania. And this is from the Wangum Glass Company, Wangum Cut Glass Company. And what I like about this photo is that it shows exactly what I would like to describe. In the left-hand photo, you see the plain picture, and next to that you see a similar picture that had been cut. You can see the intricacy of, and I say intricacy, this is a rather simple piece, quite simple as a matter of fact. But you can see the intricacy of the cutting, where the serrations across the upper portion of the spout, the handle is cut, the designs are put on the sides of the picture, and even the bottoms are cut so that there's a pattern on the bottom of the item. Now, next to that is another picture, and that tall picture is marked ready for cutting. The designer would sketch using wax pencil or some other marker, sketch a pattern for the cutter. And as the cutter is doing the cutting, he is looking down, we'll imagine, through the open surface, open area of the picture as he's moving it against the cutting wheel. So he's looking down through, and again, as I said, looking through the glass, not at the area where he is cutting directly. Patterns. I would say both the patterns for the really a period cut glass were essentially geometric. And I'll explain what I mean by that. There were lines, multiple lines, crisscross lines, curved lines, but they were lines. They weren't representations of birds or absolute representations of a particular flower. They were stylized by the use of straight cutting, curved cutting, whatever, but not the direct representation of an individual. That was a different part of the production process. So we'll talk about that in a moment. Baker's Gothic. Thomas A. Baker was a designer for Clark and Company. And in the 1880s, glass companies began to patent, and they were allowed to patent their designs. Depending upon how much they paid for the patent would be either good for 3.5 years, 7 years, or 14 years, and then could be renewed. And if they were renewed, then they could extend it depending upon how much they paid to have their patents renewed. Baker at Clark Company had 10 patented patterns. Dorflinger had 10 patented patterns, including 4 that were held by J.S. O'Connor, who eventually formed his own company. Now, when we're talking about these patterns, it's important to note that since these, as I indicated, are geometric patterns, it would almost like being holding a copyright to the word "the," so that no one else could use it. And if they did use the word "the," it would be an infringement. What many of the companies did, and there are about 37 that we'll be talking about as we progress through this discussion, what they did was hire designers who could take a pattern perhaps from Dorflinger and tweak it a little bit, add a couple extra lines so that they weren't really copyright patent infringing. So that I didn't come across any indications of any patent lawyers being involved in any issues. I didn't see anything that indicated that there were legal issues surrounding this. There may have been some discomfort, there may have been some arguments, but nothing that I saw that indicated that there were any significant lawsuits for patent infringement. Dorflinger had 10 patterns. What's interesting though, despite what I was just saying about plagiarism and copyright infringement, and Dorflinger's catalog had noted, and I will give you a quote from the catalog that said that, quote unquote, cut glass of Dorflinger manufacturer, whatever the date of purchase, can be matched with little or no delay. And cut glass from other sources, American or foreign, can be perfectly matched to order. Valuable sets which have become partially useless through breakage may thus be supplied with the missing pieces. This applies to cut glass of, I underline this, any pattern or period, end quote. So that some people weren't particularly concerned about patent infringements. If someone had a piece from Libby or Baker or some other company that needed to be replaced, and that company was defunct or they couldn't accommodate it, Dorflinger would be more than glad to do it, regardless of who held the patent. So that it was kind of an interesting note. Patterns. So it'd be beyond the scope of this presentation to go through a line-by-line identification of the different patterns that were patented. I can give you the names of some of them, and believe me, you would have to, one would have to be a true aficionado of cut glass to determine if something was a temple pattern or a starburst pattern or a monarch pattern or an Alhambra pattern or a Yale pattern or Wayne pattern. There were so many different patterns because of the variability of cutting geometric patterns into glass. A couple other components that played a role in the production of the cut glass also. Teardrops, twists, and bubbles. teardrops. It's a form of exactly what it says. It's tapered at one end and comes to a point, and could be used commonly in the stemware. Twist. Molten glass would be twisted to form ornate shapes. These could be added as handles or little baubles to the sides of punch bowls or what have you. Bubbles. As I mentioned earlier, bubbles in the brilliant cut glass were a no-no. They were cause for rejection. The glass would be discarded, thrown away, remelted, and weren't very popular. But as the raw materials became scarce, as we'll see around the 1917 timeframe, the quality of the glass possibly deteriorated a little bit, and bubbles were common. And it appeared not unusual for people with an artistic bent to utilize those bubbles in the design process to say, no, they're not by accident, they're there for artistic rendering. So that in some cases they were actually deliberately created in the glass to possibly detract purchasers from looking at the poorer quality glass. This is a piece in the collection at home that gives a demonstration of some of those geometric patterns, and it probably would be useful if I could have had a live audience in the room with me and show this piece as I'm describing the cutting and the geometric pattern and the formation of the glass and the weight of the glass. But we finally got to the point where we can look at what a piece of brilliant cut glass from that period of time actually looks like. And some of the patterns that try to move my mouse. I don't know, I hope you can see my mouse moving. This particular configuration is a Hobstar pattern. A Hobstar pattern was relatively common. The area here would be hobnail, and this piece would weigh maybe 2 to 3 pounds. And you can see the fact that this is a bowl, a shallow bowl, would have been one of the items, as I had mentioned earlier, that would have been pressed into a mold. Molten glass would have been pressed into a mold. It would not be necessarily a piece of blown glass. Here are 2 other pieces that were created by my family members. And the reason I have an interest in cut glass is I'll show you some of my present collection and my father's collection. And my wife's grandfather on her mother's side was a glass cutter, presumably for the Irving Cut Glass Company in Holmesdale, Pennsylvania. And my uncle Chris was a glass cutter for a company that I don't know. I don't know if it was Dorflinger or Irving. There were so many companies that were producing cut glass at that point in time that he could have been working for any one of them. But one of the items that my Uncle Chris did is on display in the Wayne County Historical Society building. It's a Edison light bulb that is engraved, essentially a cut glass light bulb, if you can envision that, and the delicacy of the work. And it's a functional light bulb. But it just shows the skill of the workman, and it also shows the delicacy of the craftsmanship. These items were also created by family members, and the brilliancy, the reason it's called brilliant period or brilliant cut glass is you can see the way that the light is reflected just to show its brilliance. This is a true representation of a hobnail cut. Again, multiple perpendicular, parallel, crosshatch cuts. And you can see that the size of this led for some delicate work. There was a groove cut on the side so that a metal chain, could be used as a necklace, or it could be hung as a bauble in front of a window just to reflect, to serve as a prism. But that is just one of the skills of the workman too, to be able to cut that groove along the side of the item. Once the glass is in the form that it's supposed to be, whether it's a pitcher or a plate or what have you, other techniques could be applied aside from the actual cutting. And these would be applied in addition to the cutting. Acid etching that could form a pattern on the glass. However, it had to be done very judiciously because the acid would corrode the unprotected parts of the item and could destroy the item itself. So that acid etching would just be a unique feature and not strictly part of the cut glass industry. The acid that we use would be a mixture of hydrofluoric acid and sulfuric acid, or even hydrofluoric acid by itself. And engraving. And engraving is, it's a matter of semantics. Engraving is actually glass cutting, but it's using fine copper needles, fine copper wheels to cut or etch a design into a piece of glass. It's a technique for producing artistic rendering, birds, flowers, butterflies, whatever. And it was more than just producing the geometric pattern. It was used for particular designs, so that the set that DORFLINGER's created for Lincoln and Harrison, I believe, were had tumblers that had the coat of arms of the United States and eagle motifs, so that engraving would also be part of the production process to create a brilliant piece of cut glass. Other techniques that were also used, and this was to enhance the appeal of the items. There was a case where molten glass could be flashed onto a blank, and the uncut piece of glass, I should have mentioned, is referred to as the blank. In some cases, the workers refer to it as pig iron. But the high melting point glass would be dipped into a lower melting point bath, and it would be coating the outside of the item, so that if we had a plain crystal goblet and you drop that into the bath of the low melting point, it would be coated with, let's say, a blue or a red glass, very thin veneer of red glass. An overlay, a clear blank is blown, and over that is spread another layer of colored glass. Somewhat similar to the flash, but it's a thicker layer, almost identically in thickness to the item that it was covering. And then cased glass, the glass gatherer is removed from the blowpipe, and the item's opening is then enlarged, and the new piece of glass, molten glass, colored glass, is then blown into the interior of the piece. And in this case, the layers are also about equal thickness. Now, why would someone conceptually want to do something like that? Well, it creates a very pretty item if it's, let's say, a drinking glass or a wine glass. My parents had some in their collection that were DORFLINGER cut glass. And the stem would be crystal, but the cup would be a blue flashed item. Another advantage of this that can make a very pretty pattern is by cutting the pattern into the outer surface of the glass, revealing the underlying color, whether cutting from a blue side to a clear or cutting from a clear to a blue. You can envision the beauty of an item that was patterned as such. Now, the number of companies that were doing business in Pennsylvania were was rather high, to tell you the truth. And there were regional differences too. There were companies in the western part of the state, and there were companies on the eastern part of the state. I'll define those as we look at each individual company. The western part of the state provided glassware to the Midwest, and places like Manica and Pittsburgh would be referred to as the Midwestern region if one were dealing with cut glass collections. And then on the East Coast, we have the Eastern companies. The first company, and these are all arranged alphabetically, the first company is M.J. Averbeck. And it was a New York company that had offices and sites in New York City and in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. The company had a mail order catalog and stated that their cut glass, whether low or high in price, was made and cut in their Honesdale factory. The company also said that they would sell directly to, or sold directly to jewelry stores. Now, in some cases, the brilliant cut glass was beyond the reach, price-wise, of the average citizen. And again, part of the popularity of brilliant cut glass during the Gilded Age was the fact that there was no income tax. People had a lot of, the rich, the wealthy had a lot of consumable cash that they could spend on baubles. And they looked for something new and exciting to go along with the gaudiness, essentially, of the Victorian era. So that the brilliant cut glass, the heavy cut glass, was very appealing. And aside from that, it was expensive. A plate like the one I previously showed would retail for perhaps $14 in 1890. In 1890, a dollar would be comparable to about $28 today. So if you multiply $14 times 28, you see what the average price of that item would have been in consumable cash for the average citizen. So that one of the appeals for brilliant cut glass was that it indicated that you were well-to-do, that you were above the crowd, and you had excellent taste, and you had money to spare. So that that created some of its appeal, and also ultimately led to its demise. But anyway, we'll get to that later. Another company, Becker and Wilson, later became MAHON and Wilson, or MAHON and Wilson. The factory was established in 1903 in Montrose, Pennsylvania. Operated for 15 or 20 years. Okay, it went through up to the Depression. It came in late after the Gilded Age, but it continued on for a few years. Didn't have any noteworthy patterns. T.B. Clark and Company. Thomas Byron Clark established a cut glass factory in Sealyville, excuse me. And Sealyville is just, northwest of Honesdale. And the last design pattern for cut glass issued to this company was registered in 1924. So they remained in business. They used blanks that were produced by DORFLINGER. And if they were in business in 1924, they outlasted the DORFLINGER company by 3 years. Clinton, or the Elite Cut Glass Company. It was founded in Aldenville, which is north of Honesdale. It was on the Lackawanna River near a dam, and the dam provided power for their cutting wheels. It was sold to the Elite Company. The Clinton Company was sold to the Elite Company in 1918 and continued operation again through 1924. And it's kind of unusual because we were saying it used hydroelectric or hydropower. And the production of glass varied initially during the Brilliant period. Coal had been used, anthracite had been used to fire the furnaces to melt it. And then once the petroleum was discovered in Titusville, and oil and other natural resources were available to provide heating, the heating was more consistent than what would have been obtained from just the use of coal. So that using fossil fuels aided the development of the cut glass industry and reduced expenses also, and made it a little bit easier for the companies to produce. Crystal Cut Glass Company, and that factory was located at the in Honesdale also. You don't need to know the exact address, West 14th Street. Not that anybody's going to go there, or that the factory still exists. And it was also in the former Kelly and Steinman building. So if anybody's interested, you can pursue that, but it's an insignificant fact at this point in time. And the interesting thing is that it was operated by Dr. Pearson B. Peterson. If you participated in my presentation on Major David McKelvey Peterson, you'll note that Dr. Peterson was David's father, medical physician, a medical doctor, a physician in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. So that he did more than just practice medicine. It seemed like he was kind of entrepreneurial and was a businessman also. Dithridge Flint Glass, that was located in New Brighton, Pennsylvania. This is on the other side of the Alleghenies. This is part of the Midwestern group. They had no patented patterns, and they are not a company of any significance. If you look at any of the resources, they're not listed as one of the major producers. Dorflinger Glass. Christian Dorflinger was an Alsatian, came to the United States, and he established his business in New York and then moved to White Mills, Pennsylvania. And he is the progenitor of the top quality cut glass companies in the United States. Dorflinger and Libby are probably the two that bubble to the top as far as the most noteworthy. Other companies produce glass items that might be considered rare and valuable, but not to the extent that Dorflinger did. And Dorflinger's plants were located in White Mills, Pennsylvania, currently along Route 6, halfway between Honesdale and Hawley, Pennsylvania. And Dorflinger's fame was international. He brought in glass cutters from Europe and adopted a lot of early techniques or good management techniques in production. So it indicated that it could take up to 10 hours for a craftsman to produce a tray or a shallow bowl like the one I had previously shown. He had an assembly line where one cutter would provide one type of cut, would be passed to another, and then to another and to another, because of the fact that if you recall looking at the pieces that I showed, that the depth and the size of those cuts vary, so that one workman to produce the shallow bowl would have to change maybe 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different wheels in order to get all the appropriate size cuts and pattern that was necessary and required. So that by using an assembly line, one guy, and I keep saying guy and men because it was very unusual, virtually unheard of, to have women do any of the glass cutting. But there were a couple of companies that did have women do some of the smoothing and polishing work. But no, all the cutting was essentially done by men. But anyway, DORFLINGER was one of the top quality companies, and its glass was used by several presidents, British royalty, and foreign leaders. As a matter of fact, his fluted glassware graced the royal train of the Duke of Windsor. A set of crystal numbering 2,300 pieces was made for President Menachal of Cuba. And Menachal was the president of Cuba from 1913 to 1921. It was made for him. There's 2,300 pieces at a cost of $60,000, which is a rather hefty sum considering the value of $1 in 1913. It comes to about $1.5 million in current money. So it was a pretty hefty contract and quite the sale. So that you can see the popularity of these companies and the desire for people to have cut glass manufactured by reputable or well-known companies. The Elite cut glass company, manufacturing company, they had no patented patterns, and again, they were located in Aldenville, as I had indicated earlier. H.C. Fry Glass Company, he built his factory in Rochester, Pennsylvania, that's right outside Pittsburgh, and he produced the glass that contained a high proportion of lead and fine quartz. So it was probably one of the finest quality glasses that could be used and found. The company closed in 1934. So he did work through the Depression. Gibbs and Kelly, and subsequently the Berryville Cut Glass Shop, they were in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. They moved to Hawley in 1909, and it was in operation as of 1918. The Hawley Glass Company, they manufactured 5-gallon quart containers, pint bottles, and jars. These items were allegedly individually hand blown, and there's no indication that they produced any cut glass, but they were an interesting glass producer, and because of the fact that they actually hand blew the glass items. And they ceased operation in 1942 when a flood washed their factory away. Herbeck and Deemer Company, they were active in Honesdale, Pennsylvania from about 1904 to 1911. Let's see, then the Deemer brothers broke off and they formed their own company in Halstead, Pennsylvania. That closed in 1918. And 1917, 1918 are critical because one, as I indicated, that was the end of the brilliant period. And the progressive period and the period of decline began after 1918. And we'll go into some detail as to why that occurred. There was another company, it was called the Honesdale Cut Glass Company, rather creative name. And the company had no patented patterns and it was obviously located in Honesdale, and they too are not listed in any notable references. The Irving Cut Glass Company. This is a company that my wife's grandfather presumably worked for. And the factory was established in 1900 on West 13th Street, now West Side Avenue, and it moved to Park Street in Honesdale along the river. It continued in operation until the 1930s. Irving Cut Glass had an excellent reputation. Their cut glass was sold worldwide. The items were purchased by buyers in Japan, China, South Africa, and other parts of the world, similar to the DORFLINGER company. Irving Cut Glass is one of the more notable cut glass companies, and it is cited in many references. that you would see as one of the major producers. Kelly and Steinman Cut Glass Company. They had no patented patterns, and they were located in Holmesdale, but eventually relocated to Deposit, New York. Another company was the KELZ-MYERS Cut Glass Company. They had no patented patterns. They don't bubble to the top as one of the more notable companies, and they too were located in Holmesdale. And believe me, this is not strictly a Holmesdale travel log. This is a search of all the companies that existed in Pennsylvania. And the fact that Holmesdale keeps bubbling to the surface is not particularly unusual because of its location. The canal provided easy access to New York markets. And New York, obviously, was the home of the Vanderbilts and not necessarily the Carnegies, but they did move to the eastern side of the Alleghenies at times. Other wealthy families were also in New York, so that Astors and so forth, so that by loading their wares onto the canal, they were able to ship it directly to New York City. And many of these companies also had offices and showrooms in New York, so that DORFLINGER had them in New York, IRVING had it in New York, so that there were a lot of contacts along the Hudson, so that they had a very good opportunity to be a site for major production, just as the few companies that were in the Pittsburgh area provided to the Midwest. Keystone Cut Glass Company, Wallen, or otherwise known as Wallen Murphy. In 1902, they were founded in Hawley, and they closed in 1918. Remember, 1918, again, critical year. KRANTZ Smith and Company, they were active in Holmesdale. The name changed a couple times. From KRANTZ Smith and Company, it became KRANTZ and Cell Company, and then it became G Cell and Company. The company was active essentially from 1900 to 1912. Economically, you can see there's a little bit of a shakeout too, because some of these companies lasted a decade or slightly less than a decade, or maybe even slightly longer than a decade, but didn't have the endurance that some of the major companies, again, like DORFLINGER had. As I had indicated earlier, the various types of patterns that we saw, I showed you the hob star and the hobnail patterns. They were combined to form various unique styles, and I'll show you from some of my collection some of the styles that were used by these companies, but they patented a particular name for each particular style. Again, the KRANTZ Company had the Wayne, the Delmar, and the Yale pattern. They will bubble up and be seen and referenced in some of the major works on cut glass. LACKAWANNA Cut Glass Company, that was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and that was a subsidiary of T.B. Clark and Company, which was in Holmesdale. They had the Laurel Company, and this had one noted pattern, pineapple, and they were located in German, Pennsylvania, which is in the anthracite region, and they were in operation around 1907. That company was unique in that it hired women as polishers and as cutters of simple designs. So even though referring to guys and the men who were doing the cutting, this company was unique in that it did have women to a limited degree doing limited design work. For whatever reason, women were not employed. It was probably more of a cultural aspect of the time because of the fact that I think women could be, well, there are women surgeons, so obviously the capabilities of the women to handle difficult and fine tasks is well established, and be a jerk not to realize that. Also that culturally women were to be kept in the home at that point in time. So that's why they probably weren't employed as cutters. And it was quote unquote a man's world, which is a little bit ridiculous, but we're not going to get into that right now. Let's see, Liz, did I skip one? No, the Laurel cut glass, yeah. And Luzerne Cut Glass Company, that factory was located on Delaware Avenue in West Pittston, and that's along the Susquehanna River. And it was operated by O.S. Athervold, closed around 1930. Maple City Glass Company was established in 1898 in Sealyville, Pennsylvania, and that was a subsidiary of T.B. Clark. And it moved to the former John S. O'Connor site in 1902 after T.B. Clark acquired O'Connor's company. And this company closed in 1911. The name Maple City is a nickname for Honesdale, Pennsylvania, because the main street and other streets were lined with maple trees. And as a matter of fact, some of the patterns that were cut by T.B. Clark would have a embellished a micro cutting of a maple leaf as an indicator on their items, on the bottom of their items. McCanna Cut Glass Company, that was established in 1906 in Honesdale, and it continued to operate until 1927. And the John S. O'Connor Company, John Sarsfield O'Connor was an Irish immigrant who learned his trade, worked for DORFLINGER, and purchased a company. He sold his Foley factory to Maple City Glass Company around 1900, and he moved to Goshen, New York. We'll discuss why there was a shift around the turn of the century too in some of these businesses. He was very creative. He designed several improved types of cutting wheels for DORFLINGER, and he also developed a system to evacuate glass dust. As I mentioned earlier, silicosis was a occupational hazard for glass cutters because of the inhalation of the glass dust. And he developed a system while at DORFLINGER to subsequently evacuate the glass dust away from the cutter. To back up a little bit, the DORFLINGER company, back in 1892, there was a mysterious fire of suspicious origin that destroyed their factory in White Mills. And it was a bad news, good news story, because the bad news was that the factory burned down. The good news is that he rebuilt and came back with gangbusters, expanded the operation, improved the operation, and came back stronger than he had been before. Anyway, another lesser known company, virtually unknown except for the rarity of its items, was the Owanda Glass Company, and that was in Honesdale, Pennsylvania. And a fellow by the name of Fred Liebig was the chief glass cutter. The factory burned down in 1908, but any of the items that can be attributed to the Owanda Company are considered rarities among collectors. The Phoenix Glass Company was located in Pittsburgh, or well, the Pittsburgh area, Monica, Pennsylvania. It's on the other side of the Alleghenies. And it manufactured light shades until it closed its shop and around the time of the Depression. After 1894, that's when it started manufacturing the light shades. I had taken pictures of a cut glass lamp in the collection. And unfortunately, I tried to send them to myself so that I could use them in this presentation just to show you the shape of the dome and the intricacy of the dome. But unfortunately, my smartphone wasn't smart enough, or I'm not smart enough to be able to have sent that to myself so that I could use it in this presentation. But it's kind of a helmet-shaped item. And if you do any research and look at any of the lampshades, you'll see that they're essentially dome or helmet-shaped and very intricately cut, just as any of the other items. The downside of them is with the lampshades, if they were used for electric lamps, the size of the bulb could significantly damage the dome because of the fact that the excessive heat, as I mentioned before, once glass is produced, it had to be cooled appropriately, easily over time. It's just not one and done. So that by using a lampshade on a 100-watt bulb in close proximity could cause the glass to crack if the temperature changes radically in the area of the light. If it cools too quickly, if it gets wet, any number of possibilities could significantly damage the dome. So they're very unique, and they're also very scarce because of the nature of the item. But anyway, the Pioneer Cut Glass Company, that was formed in 1905 by Andrew Mitchell in Carbondale and closed in the 1930s. Quaker City Cut Glass Company. This company had 4 noteworthy patterns: Empress, Jordan, Majestic, and Eden, and was in operation in Philadelphia in 1904. And it's one of the few companies that were in operation in the southeastern part of the state. The Rochester Tumbler Company. This was a company that was located in Pittsburgh, or Rochester, Pennsylvania, which is located near Pittsburgh. Company had no patented patterns, and it was noteworthy in the fact that at times of its maximum production, it could produce 150,000 pressed or cut tumblers per day. And it's a rather hefty, a lot of glass to be broken, and a lot of glasses to be used. We'll talk a little bit about contrasting pressed glass and cut glass in a moment. The Ryan Cut Glass Company. This company was formed before the turn of the century, and it was incorporated in 1903 in Lawrenceville, near Moosic, Pennsylvania. It was on the other side of the Moosic Mountains, and it was in operation until 1913. Smithport Cut Glass Works. They were in Smithport, Pennsylvania, and near the central part of the state. This company had no patented patterns and is not listed among the more prestigious of companies. Stage Caskins Cut Glass Company. This factory was in Lawrenceville and continued to operate until the early 1920s, and it lasted almost the decade. Taylor Brothers and Company. This was a Philadelphia company. It was established in 1902 and went out of business in 1910. And the company had one noted pattern, the Bellevue. The Tunkhannock Glass Company had operated in Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania, and that was in operation for about a little over 10 years, 12 years. The Wallen Pawpack Cut Glass Company. They had no patented patterns, and they were located in Hawley, Pennsylvania. Hawley, Pennsylvania was also on the Delaware and Hudson Canal, and also had a terminus for the Erie Railroad, so that there were ways of getting their items to market. Wangham Cut Glass Company. This company is often referred to as Monahan Brothers. It's founded in 1910. It ceased operations in 1924. And it employed 37 men, 4 women in 1919. And it was a rather interesting company because they were running parallel simultaneously with the O'Connor Company. You have the Wayne Cut Glass Company, also in Hawley, and they relocated to Towanda, Pennsylvania. We'll give you an overview of why some of these companies moved from Wayne County to other locations. We have the Wickham Hughes Company. This company had no patented patterns and was located in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Again, a terminus railroad, the Delaware and Lackawanna. Now, in 1910, the Glass Cutters Union in Pittsburgh sent organizers to Wayne County, Honesdale in particular. The cutters in Honesdale went on strike the early part of the year. And when the William Gibbs Company in Hawley began taking orders from Pennsylvania, the strike expanded and subsequently caused J.S. O'Connor and the Gibbs to move out of the county. And some of them moved to New York State just to get away from the labor crisis. It took several years for the businesses to return to normal, unfortunately. And that was the reason for the demise of several of the companies, lack of workers, people moving on to better jobs, other positions, and getting away from the labor troubles. The brilliant period also ended in 1917 because of any number of reasons, not the least of which was World War I. Germany was no longer supplying potash, which was a clarifying agent in the manufacture of the glass. Lead was taken away because it was used in ammunition manufacture. Lo and behold, we have the federal income tax coming along, and this diverted cash away from luxuries of the period. And you also have changes in culture. Art Nouveau became popular. People wanted to get away from the heavy Baroque, heavy cut glass concept. We had the availability of cheap imitations with pressed glass, so that to contrast this, if we were to make a pressed glass version of the plate that I had previously shown, the shallow bowl, one would take molten glass, put it in a steel mold, close the mold, and open the mold once the glass had cooled, take the glass out, and lo and behold, the pattern that was engraved on the steel mold would be pressed into the glass. With the cut glass process, the glass was molded into the shape of the bowl and then removed from the bowl as a blank, as I had shown in the earliest picture of the pitcher, removed as a blank and then subsequently cut, so that a labor-intensive process was then less labor-intensive, and the pressed glass was faster to produce, looked like the existing glass. However, again, as I had mentioned, if you were to purchase an item that you thought was cut glass, a couple of factors. One, remember the tinkling. If you hit the, gently tap the edge of the glass with a pencil or a fingernail, click your fingernail against it, you would hear a bell-like sound. Other than that, you could use a more sophisticated method of looking at it with the long wavelength ultraviolet light in a dark room to see how it fluoresced. And you could also feel the edges. Pressed glass items will have a smooth feeling along the area that appears to be cut. Whereas in cut glass, the actual cut glass, the edge is a little bit sharper and a little bit deeper. And it's one of the more easy ways of identifying pressed glass. And also, with some of the pressed glass, you'll also see seams. You may see a seam where the two parts came together. The other is the possible failure of the smaller companies to recover from the effect of the cutter strike. So that accounted for some of the early 20th century failures. Now, this is a copy of the catalog from the Irving Cut Glass Company. And it'll show some of their patterns and some of the items that were available, compote, cruets, mugs, and so forth. And these are all cut glass. So you can see when I was talking about the gaffer being provided with additional pieces of molten glass that were added to what he was working on. You can see the top of the bowl, the handles of the bowl, jug ears, and so forth. So that was all part of the production process. One interesting thing with the Irving Cut Glass Company, and I highlighted this, the catalog, and I quote, as you can read, well, this catalog was compiled at a large expense, and we would consider it a favor to have same preserved for future reference. Yeah, they would give them away, but the unfortunate thing is, they didn't list any prices. A close examination of this did not give you any indication of what the price was. In some cases, these were not mail order items. These were items that would be sent, could be shipped to a, not a distributor, but to a retailer on behalf of a purchaser. And then the price could be whatever the freight would bear, perhaps. I'll give you the value of some of these items and the prices that they charge for them. But the interesting thing is that during the brilliant period, during the Gilded Age in particular, the prices were so outrageous that the average citizen could not afford it, and the stores would not stock the items. W.C. Fields in Chicago would offer a catalog and they'd say, whatever you wanted, we can get for you. But they would order it and then have it subsequently shipped to the appropriate individuals or to their location and have it picked up by the purchaser. But the items were so expensive, and production was not mass production. There were a lot produced, obviously, yes, but they were not mass produced as we would know today. Like I mentioned with the one company manufacturing 150,000 tumblers in one day, that was mass production, and that was not the case with the cut glass items. So that stores would not be stocking all these various varieties. They would have to be ordered, and then once they were ordered, either manufactured or brought out of the warehouse and shipped to the appropriate destination. So prices then and now. ENGRAVING, the first company we talked about, sold a richly cut banana bowl similar to the bowl that I displayed in this presentation. They sold it for $14. In a catalog or a listing of values for those items in 1998, it would be valued at $350 to $750. A Dorflinger punch bowl valued at $1,700 to $2,000. The ladle, $600, and each cup, $80 current value. Part of my family's collection is a photo of my father that was displayed in one of the local newspapers. Shows a small portion of his collection. Some of the items that were produced and in the collection were a fruit bowl, carafe, and glasses. Glasses, as I indicated, were cut on the bottom also. Compote, fruit could be put in there, oranges, apples, whatever, for display. Perfume bottles, more popularly called cologne bottles, napkin rings, toothpick holders, all types of items were cut glass. Finger bowls here. Here's a celery base. It was not unusual to use celery as a decoration. So the heavy vase type arrangement would be used, and the stalk of celery would be placed in it, and it would be displayed like a flower. Banana bowls, clocks, creamers, sugar and creamers, all types of items were produced. Toothpick holders. And one piece of resistance in the collection is a 34-inch high umbrella stand. Canes and umbrellas in well-to-do houses were put in glass vases, enormous glass vases like this, umbrella holders. And this piece was 34 inches high, probably one of the largest and heaviest ever produced. And this is my father proudly displaying the item. And this is the item. You can see that it was cut. It would take a lot of wind to have blown this on a blowpipe, so that the production was probably in some type of mold. But again, I have no details on that. We have a serrated scalloped edge, and unfortunately, this is a little bit of a hazy photograph. You can see this is the rough cut. It's a matte type finish, unpolished, and it's unsmoothed because apparently when it was being cut, someone went a little too deeply and put a crack in the item. And as such, it was not thrown back into the waste bin because it was still functional. It's still in one piece and the bottom never broke off, but it did have a crack. So therefore, it wasn't an item that Dorflingers could sell. And subsequently, as a result, never finished the production process, never polished it, and never did anything else to it. Let me see now. This is a vase in the family, my hallway. And this shows the type of cutting along the edge. And cutting like this would have been done by the apprentices. Youngsters who were learning the business would be given items like this to cut with this type of pattern, or put the scallops in, or the ridges and the edging, because it was less likely that they would do significant damage to the item, so that it was simple enough for them to get the practice, but difficult enough so that they would have the experience. And another shot of the vase was the daisy pattern. And this is probably, I would suspect, from the Irving company, the Irving cut glass company, because that was popular with them, the typical daisy cut. Here you can see hobnails, X's. There are various names for all the geometric patterns, and it was well beyond the scope of anything we'd even want to go into tonight, because Vesica was a particular geometric pattern, and that was more like football-shaped cut, a pointed oval. There were roses. One company had the patented rose, and it was just a stylized rose that was cut into the glass, so that the flower motif were all basically geometric patterns. They weren't etched, they were cut. This was the crowning joy of my father's collection, a large goblet, heavy. It looks delicate. This is just a reflection of the in the photograph in the light, but you can see the delicacy of the cutting. Flawless. The glass is flawless. It rings like a bell when you tap it, and it is heavy, very thick glass. I mean, you wouldn't want to drop it on a concrete floor or even a carpeted floor, but it's still not your very fine glass. It's not Limoges or anything like that as far as thin glass or thin material. It is relatively thick and surprisingly quite heavy. There's another vase, large mouth vase. hard to see the pattern on that, but this is the base of that vase. And that was also cut. Again, cut to probably do away with the umbilicus, the spot where a blowpipe may have been attached, or other items may have, other parts of the molten glass have been attached when it was being molded and shaped. As far as the sources that I used in tonight's presentation, the following references were used in addition to common knowledge and my father's collection. BrilliantCutGlass.com is an outstanding review of cut glass from the Brilliant period and details on manufacturers and their patterns. And Captain Clint's Place, Antique American Brilliant Cut Glass. And then for the Tri-County Independent, Recall-Iwangum Cut Glass Company by Peter Becker, who's a childhood friend along with George Harrison is probably in this discussion also tonight. Peter Becker is a childhood friend and is now the managing editor of the Tri-County Independent and former neighbor. And bibliography, Pearson's are the premier authorities on cut glass patterns. And if you really want to do some mind bending, you can go through the various types of patterns. And it could be very tedious for someone who's not particularly interested or a adamant collector. And then we also have Martha Louise Swan. And this is an excellent book, gives an excellent overview on the cut glass process, how glass is produced, puts it in historic perspective, looks at the major companies, the ones I mentioned, Awanda, the Irving Cut Glass Company, the Dorflingers, and the Clarks, so that those are the ones that were in Pennsylvania that received the highest notoriety in the book. So I come to the conclusion. I want to thank you for participating and listening. And I would
you open it up for questions now, Walter?
Yes. What should I hit on here now?
You can hit end show or end stop the share. But folks, if you want to ask Walter a question, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I just hit the new share pause. Oh,
Stop share.
Let's see. I can't seem to find that.
Okay, don't worry about it. Anyone have any questions for Walter?
I just want to say, this is Joe here. It was interesting, Walt. It was very nice. I was very glad to go through this.
Thank you. Glad you enjoyed it. Any other questions?
Walter, my name is Gwen, and I was just wondering what some chips or something out of the cut glass would do to the value of it. Things and such over the years.
Okay. The bottom line is perfection is always preferred, but as a collector, if someone were to put an item up for sale, for example, I just saw a vase, a Dorflinger vase, similar to the one that I pictured here. This one wasn't a Dorflinger cut glass vase, but a Dorflinger vase, same size, with a chip, was on eBay for $750. So it gives you an idea of some of the prices that the people are asking. And let me see. I have something blocking out your picture, unfortunately. But let me see. Let me try that. There. Can you see me?
Yes, I can. You're
Oh,
good.
okay.
Hey, you're on, Walter. I stopped your screen share.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Thank you. So, yes, any damage will detract from the value, but relative to the rarity and the price of the item, yeah, it depends on how rare it is. It won't hurt it. Again, a $750 Dorflinger vase is rather steep, even with a crack, even with a chip. So I hope that answers your question. It's
Yes, another question, is it basically just the pattern that you're able to identify who made it? Or I've never,
yes.
yeah, I've
Mhm.
never seen anything on the bottom of any of the vases or bowls that I have.
No, some of the companies would emboss a trademark of sorts onto their glass. Some of it may be so shallow that most people are, without really being searching for it, would never see it. Another thing is Dorflinger used paper labels on their items. So there was no indication of who manufactured it, other than by knowing what the patterns were, by looking at the particular types of patterns. And then the other concern is, even with regard to the patterns, is it indicated there were, I think, hundreds of patents that were provided for the patterns. Some of the manufacturers would hire designers who could essentially plagiarize someone else's pattern close enough to pass it as a piece of Dorflinger glass, perhaps, or Irving cut glass, when in fact it was from a lesser known company, but a similar pattern, but may have had hobnails in a star or added lines somewhere in the pattern so that it was slightly different, so therefore not a patent infringement. So
How much
yes.
of an expert would you have to be to spot something like that?
Boy, Joe, you have to deal with it day in and day out. It's mind-boggling. If you look at anything with the patterns, if you check either of those two books, you'll see hundreds of different types of patterns that were produced. I have, okay, here we go. Baker's Gothic. Thomas A. Baker was employed by T.B. Clark, and the Baker's Gothic was a star center in the 3 center Hob stars. Yeah, it's like, okay, that was patented in 1888. Monarch pattern. The Monarch pattern was a Hob star over X flashes. Yeah.
Okay, what kind of pattern is this?
That is hard to determine with I like the,
Yeah, with the light probably.
no, the flower on the side, Joe. That's good. It's like,
From what I understand, it's a Dorflinger.
very possibly.
Yeah.
There are.
We have 2 of them here, and
Excellent. You know what? With what did you get those from my dad, or did you buy those?
no, I don't think so. The one I got from Grandma Hook.
Okay.
When that was, well, back in the 60s. And I don't know where the other one came from.
Okay. Yeah. Very. And to refocus back on Gwen's question too, one of the best ways to identify these is if you can get a copy of a manufacturer's catalog. If you can find a copy or a reproduction of a Dorflinger catalog, or as I shown the Ivy or the Irving cut glass company, if you can find their catalog and go through it, find a piece that looks like yours, or look at the patterns that they have on the items that they have, then that is a clue as to who the manufacturer is. But believe me, it's trying to, one has to really be tuned into the styles of the patterns, Joe, because there's so many, like I said, the imitations. And
Yeah.
I listed maybe 37 companies that were in business in Pennsylvania. but that doesn't count the guys who, did glass cutting in their barn as a sideline. There were people who were doing this on their own. A lot of these companies, Clark was one of them, would use Dorflinger blanks. Dorflinger was one of the major producers of the blanks that were used by other companies to cut their glass, so that you could have Dorflinger glass, with a IRVING cutting, or Dorflinger glass with a Clark cutting. Some of those opportunities exist, possibilities exist, but it's impressive though. That's a very nice piece. If it came from Grandma Hook, it very possibly was Dorflinger. I don't know. Our Uncle Chris, we are kind of a family reunion, Mark. I'm sorry, but
Hi, Mark.
but Uncle Chris was a glass cutter, and probably when the businesses declined, and he was out of work, and then he established his own business, not glass cutting, but repair work and all. They probably got in the area where she was, cut glass from companies in that area. You wouldn't find necessarily her having a Libby collection, or something from a company in Kentucky. These were all items that were probably made in the Wayne County, Pennsylvania area, and most likely Dorflinger or BECKER, or even some of the lesser known companies. So the best way to identify the patterns, though, the bottom line is if you can get hold of the catalog, if you can find them, and they're becoming more and more available.
I wonder if they'd be online.
What's that?
I wonder if they'd be online.
Some of them may be. I checked with the Smithsonian and the Federal Archives, and some of them are being put online, but you're pretty close to White Mills. So the Dorflinger Museum has an extensive library, and unfortunately, I reached out to them in regard to this presentation. I sent an email to Jim at dorflinger.net and never got a response. The only person I got a response from was Peter Becker, and he was most helpful in giving me useful information that I could apply to the presentation. But and he had a copy of the Wangum catalog and photographs and that, so you could pick out some of their patterns. But the people at Dorflinger, I never heard back from them, but they allegedly have a rather extensive museum, and they have the catalogs. That's one place to go and find out. And you can even take pictures and show it to them. If they're the true experts, they'll be able to identify it.
Yeah, Peter Becker, is that the guy down in the Indian Orchard?
No, he lives in White Mills. He's the editor of the Tri-County Independent.
Okay. I knew a Peter Becker there in Indian Orchard, right there by the old movie house, the old movie drive-in.
No, I'm not familiar with the area, but
Oh, okay.
yeah.
All right, any further
area.
questions for
I'm sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
I have a quick one. This is George Harrison. Walter, what about the men who were hired to do this work? Especially a lot of them were immigrants or brought over. Was there any apprenticeship or journeyman or anything else like that going on?
Oh yeah, definitely. A lot of apprentices. They were the people who would help the gaffer. If if the gaffer needed the principal blower, the glass blower guy, needed any assistance, it would be the apprentices who would be the ones that would do the grunt work. If something needed to be reheated, so say the glass cools too fast. If you've ever been to Corning and watched the people there, or even up in Bethlehem, there's a glass production system there, and we went to Bermuda, and there's a place they were blowing glass. If the glass, when they're working it, if you're familiar with it, the glass cools. If it becomes too cool, you can't manipulate it and do what you want it to do, then it has to be reheated. And then what the apprentice would do is take it from the gaffer, go over to what they call a glory hole, put it through into a furnace again. But the opening of that furnace was a little bit smaller than the one where the gather was originally taken. So that they would take that glass and then subsequently reheat it, bring it back. And the guy would work his magic, twirl it again and stretch it or do whatever. But, oh yeah, and the cutting too. With the cutting, as I had mentioned, like on the vase, the material, the scalloping or the serrating edges would be produced by the apprentices, the new guys, because it was less likely that they would do anything that would be of any significant damage. If they screwed something up, it could be polished away or taken and fixed. Good question.
Walter, one question. What would be the best approach to someone wanting to sell pieces like this?
Ooh, that is a good question. That's one I'm faced with myself. If anybody's interested in buying any glass, definitely get in touch with the library here, and we can see what can be done. But best way, Etsy is selling, eBay is selling, advertising glass. The important thing is, to cover yourself. Make sure that if you're selling it, just a second. There's one company, the Brilliant Glass, the one reference that I had, brilliant.com. It was the Bidens in California. I don't know if they're related to the president-elect or not, but they're in California, and they apparently do broker cut glass. If you need additional information on that, I can't back up to my presentation to get that, but I think it's brilliantglass.com,
Okay.
and that will bring you to that particular site. There's another site out there that also will buy glass, and they say that if you send them a photograph and they make an offer, they will send you the check, they will send you the money, and they don't expect the item to be shipped until you've cashed the check and the check is cleared, so that you know that they're honest, and then you would ship the glass item to them. And in my research, I just passed through it and I didn't write it down. I wish I had, because it's a strange market. The downside to a lot of this is that COVID has really shot everything in the head. You can't walk into an antique. I've approached to sell some items. I've contacted different antique dealers and sent them emails, and you hear nothing back, because chances are they may not even be in business anymore. They may be out. Hopefully they're not taking a cruise somewhere, but but they're out there somewhere. But this has really made it difficult, because you can't, to be nice to walk into a place and display it, and you should have some idea of what a nice cat, my daughter's cat, gets on her lap while she's doing her work. But anyway, there are people who would probably buy things, but the first caveat is you buy at retail, you sell at wholesale. So someone, if you're not familiar, and as Joe had indicated, with the piece that he showed, if you have a Dorflinger piece of glass, but you don't know that it's a Dorflinger piece of glass that is at the $750 mark, someone in an antique shop who would recognize that could say, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll give you $50 for it." So that, again, it's very, very difficult to, offload at this point because of the different concepts and, it almost have to be an informed seller to really make sure you don't get cheated unless you really want to offload it and any price, if it's inherited or whatever, any price is better than no price and having it sit around or break or whatever.
Oh,
Hope that answers your question.
It's
does.
it's nice to have a cousin who's an expert too.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way I talk to Joe.
Thank
So-
you. It was a wonderful presentation.
It
Thank
was.
you. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's
Thank
good to
you
see
very much,
everyone.
Walt.
Joe.
Thanks so much,
Hey,
Walter.
George.
Yeah, great thorough job. And this presentation, if anybody wants to revisit it, will be up on the library's YouTube channel in a couple of days. So thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Be safe. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks again, Walter.
Thank you for your patience.
God
Thank you,
bless.
everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Keep your hat on tight, buddy.